Hello, dear listeners, and welcome to another episode of Field Notes, the weekly podcast from the Hindu Business Line on all things agribusiness. As I promised you yesterday, this is the second part of this special podcast we're doing on India's big push for palm oil. Yesterday, I spoke to Dr. R.K. Mathur, the director of Indian Institute of Palm Oil Research. Dr. Mathur claimed that the effort to increase palm oil cultivation in India will not involve the cutting of even an inch of forest in the northeast or anywhere else in the country. On this important issue, we'd like to bring you multiple perspectives. Today, I'm in conversation with Bhavna Prasad, who's the Director of Sustainable Business at Worldwide Fund for Nature, or WWF in India. Bhavna has over 17 years of experience in diverse sectors ranging from banking to environmental consulting and NGOs. Hello, Bhavna, and welcome to Field Notes. Let me begin by asking you about WWF's work in bringing transparency to the oil palm trade around the world and in palm production, just to give our viewers a sense of your locus standi in this, and what your skin in the game is.
Sure. So WWF has been working on palm oil or focusing on palm oil for the last couple of years, particularly linked to our work on deforestation linkages. Because a lot of the agricultural production of some of these commodities, whether it's palm oil or soybean oil, some of these or soya, have had impacts where they've led to deforestation, whether it's burning of forests or displacement of forest areas in order to bring palm oil plantations in those areas. And that track record has been in Indonesia and Malaysia, which are the largest producers of palm oil, for example, or in Latin America, where there's been expansion of soybean oil. So we've been working on various commodities for the last several years, particularly in terms of their impact on natural habitat, fragile ecosystems, looking at addressing biodiversity impacts and also social impacts in many of these regions. Mm-hmm. So our focus has primarily been on creating that awareness to get industry, government, NGO sectors to come together and establish a better mechanism of producing the same edible oils in a way which are more sustainable. And as part of that effort, along with industry consortia and other stakeholders, we've been working to push industry standards or voluntary standards, which raise the bar in terms of sustainable production, for example. In Indonesia and Malaysia, we've been working on sustainable production through standards such as responsible RSPO, which is responsible production for sustainable palm oil. It's basically a standard that's been around for 10 years. And as a result of those standards, some of the government standards have also emerged, whether it's in Indonesia or Malaysia. So as a result of some of that voluntary effort, some governmental standards are also emerging, which are very positive from our perspective.
Why was WWF roused into action in the first place with palm oil in Southeast Asia? Give us a sense of the kind of destruction we are looking at in those regions because of palm oil cultivation.
So palm oil cultivation in some cases, in some of those areas, was leading to palm oil plantations were displacing natural ecosystems or natural forests. And these regions have very high biodiversity in them. There's endemic species which are not found anywhere else. And so with expansion of palm oil and unsustainable expansion of palm oil in certain areas, there was destruction of biodiversity and even labor or human right impacts, so social issues basically. So a combination of those factors led us to engage and build a constructive dialogue where the idea was not to push back palm oil as such, because it's not a commodity that we're against as such. It's more about how it's produced and where it's produced, which is the issue. There are better ways of producing palm oil, which is what our focus has been, that let's do it in a way that it is sustainable, but at the same time, ensure that we are not destroying the last biodiversity hotspots in the world today.
Mm-hmm. Bhavna, in that light, what do you make of India's palm oil mission that envisages bringing about 3 million hectares into palm cultivation over the next decade?
Look, I think any country similar like India ultimately is keen to have a self-sustaining production and to make sure that we are self-reliant and are not importing from other regions. Obviously that is an important sort of position and development for a country as such. But I think we really need to look at palm oil production in a way we are in principle not against, as I said earlier, on the production of palm oil or the fact that India is pushing for greater palm oil production. I think it's important from a self-reliance perspective, but I think we also need to put or balance that argument in a way that we really understand whether this is going to be on agricultural land. I don't think we have enough clarity as such at this point to say that where and how it is going to be produced. I think there is some indication that it's going into current regions, which is like Telangana, Andhra Pradesh, or it could go into the northeast, or it could go into Andaman and Nicobar Islands as well. So we don't know exactly where in those regions it will go into, and if it is going to impinge on biodiversity. I think the main concern that some stakeholders have are that it should not impinge on India's biodiversity. At the end of the day, it should not go into those areas in the first place. I mean, I think that's the main concern. But and one of the other issues that I think we really need to be cognizant of is the production and the water footprint of palm oil as well.
I'll come to that shortly. I'll come to that.
Yes.
Before that, I wanted to ask you, see, the government till this point, it denies that there will be any displacement of forest under this program. It raises a few questions in my mind. Does it wash with you, as WWF, that this kind of ambitious plan, and especially plans to cultivate it in the Northeast, will not have any impact on the forest land?
So as of now, we do not have enough information to be able to say that, yes, it will not impinge. We would like to understand that a bit better and get more data and information from the government to say that what are the areas that are being impacted or will be where expansion will happen. So I think that is something that we really are looking to understand a bit more. And it's difficult for us to say at this stage that whether it will impinge or it will not. It's something that we would definitely like more information. And I think the main thing that we are looking for is that it should not impinge. If there is expansion, we need a little bit of more clarity, and that it should not impinge. If that is the case, then obviously it's something positive. But if it is going to impinge, then though these are fragile ecosystems, which are very, very critical from India's natural capital perspective. So I think that's something that we really need to be cognizant of in terms of expansion.
The government says that this is fundamentally going to be a farmer's crop in India. This is not a monoculture plantation crop like in Southeast Asia, and therefore you need to look at this through a different lens. This has a completely different context. If that is the case, then should we not worry at all?
I think it's difficult to tell whether this is going to be exactly. I mean, to be honest, I think let's just put things into perspective. So the way India's impact is on in terms of production of palm oil is going to be fairly different from what has been in Indonesia and Malaysia. So the agroclimatic conditions are very different. The way the Indian systems are there, and even in our country, the agroclimatic regions are very different. So whether it's the Northeast or it's the South, I think those agroclimatic conditions are quite different in these regions as well. So I think we really need to assess that in terms of how it would work. But at this stage, I'm not so sure if we understand entirely whether it'll be homogeneous or intercropping or how it will be implemented. I think we need a little bit more clarity. It's very difficult to be able to tell without enough clarity whether it would actually be with monocropping, and it would be balanced in a way that is more sustainable in terms of production. Particularly in Northeast. I'm not so sure how that would work. So we would like to know more about that, of course.
Bhavna, this also sounds like a leap into the unknown for India. This is not a traditional crop in India. There is marginal farming of oil palm in India, and here we have very big plans. Of bringing in about 3 million hectares of land into palm. Given the kind of risks, do you think it even sounds feasible? And I'd also want you to touch on the other attendant risks of oil palm, like its very large water footprint that you alluded to.
Right. I think I wanted to also highlight, you're right. I mean, I think we really, this is an area that from an India standpoint, there has been efforts as part of the National Mission for Edible Oils. There has been efforts before as well, where there were commitments. But I think that with this time, with 11,000 crores being committed to that, I think there seems to be a greater push for sure this time. But I would like to highlight that there were issues earlier where there was production that was pushed earlier a couple of years back, where because of the long gestation period, farmers found it unsustainable and they actually pulled out some of their plantations a couple of years back when there was a previous push. So the current push, without the right mechanism incentives, I'm not so sure if it would necessarily work. That's one aspect. But I think the greater part is that we are importing almost 64% of our edible oil in the country. Of that, almost 60% is palm oil. So palm oil forms our largest imports as an edible oil. But even if we look at current production, our current production is less than 5%, or I would say it's 3 to 4% of our current usage. So even if you double your consumption, you would still not be able to meet the kind of consumption requirements you have, and these consumption numbers are going to go up. So even with a doubling, we would not be able to meet or be self-reliant. So I think the imports are going to continue irrespective. It would still not make a big dent in terms of our consumption. So that's one point I wanted to make. And the second point,
but maybe self-reliance is a long-term goal. In the short term, any reduction in the import bill may help the government.
Right. So there are two aspects to it. Palm oil is relatively the most cost-effective edible oil in terms of imports today, and producing that in India will have its own costs and benefits as well that we will have to assess. But in terms of water footprint, palm oil it's normally grown in tropical regions where there is a fair amount of water and equatorial regions. So the water levels are fairly high, and the agroclimatic conditions that are in those regions might not be that conducive from an India standpoint. That's one. And then the water footprint is fairly high. And that is something that really needs to be kept in mind while assessing this particular commodity versus other commodities that are going to be produced in India.
Can you give us any sense of how much of a water guzzler oil palm may be?
I think it's difficult to tell because the numbers vary depending on region to region. Even in Indonesia and different islands, the production level and the quantity and amount of water used for different crops is different. And the same, I think, to be honest, will have to be assessed in India as well. It is probably not as much as paddy or sugarcane, but essentially it has a fairly high footprint compared to maybe some of the other crops which are less water intense. But the exact numbers, I think we need to pair that and do that analysis a bit more in order to be able to come up with exact numbers.
Bhavna, given the risks, do you think we'd be better off looking at other more conventional sources of edible oil in India, looking at groundnut or soy, or our traditional oils like til and mustard?
So I think at an aggregate level, I'm not, we as an organization, we are not really agri experts. I'm sure that a mixed basket would definitely add value. But it's difficult for us to tell whether, if you look at because there's so many factors that go into deciding whether you should go for one crop versus another, because there's so many different factors. But at this point, it's difficult for us to be able to say that, yes, no, you should choose one versus the other. But purely from a production standpoint, as I said earlier, I think we really need to do that assessment before we really go to that level of investment for palm oil in India. And I'm sure that we are importing other edible oils as well, whether it's soybean oil or sunflower oil. We are already importing a fair amount of these edible oils as well. So some amount of production in India would potentially make sense. But at the same time, we really need to do that assessment before we go all out and make that commitment.
Would you be engaging with the government now that the government has come out with this new edible oil policy? How does it work? Does WWF actively seek engagement with governments on an issue like this?
We would like to work constructively with the government. I mean, I think the government is in general receptive to any new ideas or solutions. So we would be happy to engage and have conversations. And we've done that before on other issues, and that doesn't stop us from having a conversation more constructively to find solutions, because it's in everybody's best interest to do it in a way that is sustainable for India.